besides the two singles that you guys have already released for this new Winery Dogs album, which I love, what really caught my ear from this new album is Breakthrough, which I just love the drumming on it, and it's, I would call it kind of surprising, in that those early verses on Breakthrough, there's a point where you just really pull back, and but it's mellow, but it's busy. You're doing a lot of kind of percussion work underneath the vocals, and it's this cool Stuart Copeland-esque kind of thing
Totally,
going
Stuart.
on.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
and I mean, I don't know how. I know it's always difficult to describe where ideas come from in the creative process, but I'm curious what led you to that, because it seems very different for you.
Well, I mean, I'm always about playing for the song. It doesn't matter what band I'm doing it with. If it's a really proggy progressive thing with some of the other things I do, it's still about the song. But more than ever, and more than any other thing I'm a part of, the Winery Dogs, it's about the vocals, it's about the hooks and the melodies. That is the most important thing with anything we do in the Winery Dogs. So that specific example, the song Breakthrough, which is one of my favorites, and it's going to be the next single, I believe.
Oh, cool.
When you have a song like that, where the vocals are so important and so strong and hooky, you got to pull back and give space to it. Everybody in this band has chops for days, but it's really not about flexing them at all times. It's like, let's make sure the vocals are in the foreground and the focus, and then you could sprinkle these little things underneath. So yeah, in that particular case, the first verse is only guitar and vocals. So when it came time for the second verse, I still wanted to pull it back and keep that kind of dynamic it had in the first verse, but give it a little bit of a pulse and some interesting nuances. Like you said, the Stuart Copeland kind of, splash and hi-hat work underneath, and Neil Peart would do that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, that's kind of just playing for the song.
Yeah, and you've even said, I was going through some other recent interviews you did, and you were talking about the priority for this band is, first it's the song, and then second it's musicianship. And I think I know what you're talking about, in the sense that I feel like I've heard there's times where people go a little overboard on musicianship, and the song kind of gets buried. And I don't know, just and I wondering if you could elaborate on that a little further, and how you guys are able to keep that, because as you said, you have chops for days and yet you don't step on each other. The song, the groove is still there.
I,
What's the best way to accomplish that?
I think that kind of sensibility just comes with age and experience. If I was writing drums to a song like Breakthrough 35 years ago, when I was in my 20s, I probably would have been doing a lot more busy stuff and trying to be a little more intricate. And I don't know, I guess as you get older, as you mature, as you write more and more songs throughout your career, you learn, the importance of a time and a place for everything.
Yeah. And then, you talked about the importance of the vocals and keeping that at the forefront. But it's interesting because, from what I've read, Richie, as these songs evolve, he kind of improvises at first what the vocals will be, and sometimes even just basic sounds and what he feels is going to work. How does one wrap a drum part around vocals that are just kind of being made up on the spot?
Well, the melodies are coming pretty early on. When we're in the room, the three of us, and bouncing ideas off of each other musically, putting an arrangement together, and I'm prepping to maybe lay down a drum track. Usually Richie is doing some sort of scatting on top with melodies. The words may not be there and the exact phrasings may not be there, but at least like the melodies and the possible phrasings are there, and you could kind of work around that. In the case of Breakthrough specifically, being you brought it up, I remember Richie was scatting some melodies and different weird words on the chorus. Like he kept singing, I'm falling and breaking, falling and breaking. So we knew that was going to be kind of the rhythmic pattern of the vocals. And it's
Mm-hmm.
funny, this particular song, when we were at that stage, I kept telling him, I keep hearing in that phrasing, because I'm having a breakthrough. I kept hearing those words, I'm having a breakthrough. So when it came time for him to start really writing lyrics, I remember even suggesting, hey, I kept hearing breakthrough instead of falling and breaking, which is what he was singing. And he was open to it and ended up embracing that suggestion and writing around it. So, there's an example where sometimes he's scatting something in the writing process, and it will inspire maybe where the words or the phrasing should go. Sometimes it gets changed, sometimes it gets kept. I think some of the things he was phrasing early on with Xanadu ended up sticking and became the final vocals. So you never know. When you're in that early stage, you're still experimenting with a lot of different things.
Yeah. And, have you guys ever wished that you could really road test these songs before you record them? Or do you like the fact that you just kind of come up with them and then immediately lay them down?
I personally like being in the moment when we're inspired and we're putting it together and we're really feeling the energy. I like hitting the red button and getting my tracks right there and then. I don't like necessarily overthinking my parts and having days or weeks or months sometimes to sit on it. Also, I mean, there's been times like, with the second Winery Dogs album, we wrote all the songs, got all the blueprints together, then went home for a while Richie demoed all the lyrics and everything. And then we went into the studio and tracked all 14 songs. And there's something to be said for having that time to let it simmer. But there's also something to be said, like, I'm not necessarily crazy about that process, because then you have to go into the studio and concentrate on like 14 songs at once. Whereas the way we did this album, you could concentrate one at a time as they're being written. And the other thing about, you can't really road test material in this day and age, in 2023, because any show you play is going to be, on YouTube by the time you get back to the bus at the, an hour or two after the show. So, anybody that's premiering new material or unrecorded material live, it gets ruined at this point by everybody filming everything and uploading it onto YouTube immediately. So it's kind of dangerous these days to premiere new material live on stage. It's harder and harder to achieve that without it being ruined by a horrible recording, and that's the official premiere of a brand new song.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that. And it's like I've seen interviews with comedians where there's a lot of comedy clubs now. If you go, they make you put your phone in this case that gets locked and stuff like that. And people they've had to educate an audience where they say, I saw him and this bit wasn't that good, and he had to explain, look, I'm just working this out.
Right.
This is in its very rawest form. It takes some time before it becomes the finished polished
Exactly.
piece. And so yeah, no, that is a good point. It's sad it's kind of that's been lost to advancements in technology.
Yep.
And although, again, as we were talking just before we hit record, your experience with Liquid Tension Experiment was all about coming up
Spontaneity.
with, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Remember I asked you what the difference was between album 1 and album 2, and you said, yes, we took twice as long to record that, a whole 2 weeks,
Yeah. Well, Liquid Tension Experiment, those LTE sessions I did in the late 90s was really the first experience of writing and recording simultaneously, because up until that point, I only had Dream Theater, in the 80s and 90s before those LTE albums. And all of those early Dream Theater albums, especially when Dreaming Day and Night, Images and Words, and Falling into Infinity, the first, second, and fourth albums, we had years to compile that material. The only exception was Awake, which we were thrown off the road back into the studio, had to write and record. But the first, second, and fourth album, we were in holding patterns where we would spend months, even years, writing that material. So by the time we got together after those first 4 Dream Theater albums, and John and myself, along with Jordan and Tony Levin, we had this Liquid Tension experiment. Literally, that was why the word was in there. Those first 2 albums was the first times we ever went into a studio with a blank canvas, jammed, either spontaneously jammed and that made the record, or jammed and wrote in a jamming sense and arranging and, on the spot and then recording. So those first two albums were the first time I had ever done that. And I've done it dozens and dozens of times since. It's kind of become the way that I work with most of the bands I'm a part of. Dream Theater embraced that style of writing and recording after the LTE albums and the albums that followed, and all the other things I've done through the years, whether it be Transatlantic or Flying Colors or Winery Dogs or Metal Allegiance. Most of those cases are kind of get in the studio, jam, bounce ideas off of each other, create the music, and then hit record and go. And I like that way of working. It keeps you on your toes, keeps it fresh, keeps it spontaneous. The inspiration is right there in the moment. So it's a style of writing and recording that, I started with LTE in the 90s, but I've embraced ever since.
And then, there's always that special connection between the drummer and the bass player. And you mentioned Tony Levin. You've played with some amazing bass players. Billy Sheehan is certainly up at the top of that list. And I'm curious, I mean, because you've played with so many great guys, how is he different in his greatness as far as your interaction?
Are you talking about Billy? Billy or Tony?
You and Billy Sheehan in
Yeah,
Winery Dogs.
Billy and I have a tremendous connection as a rhythm section, and honestly, all those years in Dream Theater, I was more connected to the guitar. John Petrucci and myself were always like a very strong guitar drum team, very similar to like Eddie and Alex Van Halen or Lars Ulrich and James Hetfield. That's kind of the way I came up in my early years of writing and recording. But Billy and I have a real true drum bass rhythm section connection, and it's probably the strongest rhythm section connection I have with a bass player than anything else I'm a part of. I don't know. Billy and I are just very similar players in that sense. We like being in the moment. We like just not overthinking things. Billy has an expression I heard him cite 20 years ago when we first started working together. He said, "If you're thinking, you're stinking."
Yeah.
And I like that. There's something to be said. You do want to put a lot of thought and care into what you do, but also if you overthink things, you're no longer feeling it. I would rather feel music than have to overthink it. If somebody suggests, "Hey, try a kick pattern that's going bump, 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 bump," like suddenly if I'm like thinking about my foot, I'm gonna fuck up big time. I never think about what my feet are doing. For instance, I literally, when I'm creating patterns and parts, I'm just going. I'm not overthinking what my foot is doing. And immediately, if I have to start thinking about it, it throws me off, and it no longer feels like it's natural or has a groove. And Billy's that type of player as well. So Billy and I, especially live on stage, any fills going from verse to chorus or from chorus to bridge, those moments and those fills are 90% of the time completely spontaneous and unspoken. And a lot of times Billy and I will just completely lock on a fill without even thinking about it or talking about it or looking at it. It just happens. So yeah, he and I have this really tremendous rhythm section connection. Very, very similar. To me, it reminds me a lot of the way Keith Moon and John Entwistle had that kind of synergy in those early live Who albums. Like, listen to the Who live at Leeds and the way that Keith Moon and John Entwistle play. That's definitely the blueprint for Billy and I.
Yeah, and actually, I got to interview Billy a couple of months ago. It was regarding the Talus release, not the Winery Dogs, but he again was commenting on that, and I thought the example he gave for the rest of us mortals was, he said, you ever talk to someone and you could tell they're just thinking about the next thing they're going to say without really listening to you.
Yeah,
and
that's a great point.
And so, yeah, I would say when and I encourage people to look up there's a lot of great footage you guys playing live, and there's a great conversation going on between the two of you. Now, I was checking out these videos and checking out your Winery Dogs kit, which there's a decent number. There's a few things going on, although you're one of the few people in the world where I would say you scaled way back from what you used to pay for this. So first off, regarding that, what I found is interesting is you kept a couple of octobons as part of this stripped down kit.
Yeah.
Why have those rather than some other rack toms?
Well, this is the third Winery Dogs album and tour cycle, and for all three albums and cycles, I've used different kits. So the first album, I was coming out of all those years with Dream Theater and the massive 100-piece drum kit. So with the Winery Dogs, it's like, all right, here I am with a new band, and it's all about the groove, and it's all about that old school, 60s and 70s power trio feel. So I was like, I am stripping down to a Bonzo kit. So that first album cycle, it was a total John Bonham kit, just kick, snare, one rack, two floors, old school, and that was it. And that was fun for that first cycle. Then the second album and cycle for Hot Streak, I was like, well, you know what? I want to go with more of the single-headed concert tom approach. That old school Phil Collins,
Charlie
Alex Van
Watts.
Halen, Peter Criss,
Charlie Watts.
well, no, Charlie Watts didn't have the open-ended. I'm talking about the old school single-headed kits like Peter Criss, Phil Collins, Alex Van Halen.
Okay.
It was a bigger kit. It was a double bass kit, but it was all single-headed concert toms. Roger Taylor, that kind of sound and style. So that was kind of my approach for the second kit and cycle. And now this time around, well, I should say before we started this album, Winery Dogs did a fun tour in 2019 in the summer, just for the fun of it. No new album, nothing to promote. And for that tour, I used this setup that I'm now using for the third album and cycle. And it was just a kit I put together for the fun of it, utilizing two octobans in the front as my main racks. So basically it's two octobans and a small 10-inch tom. So it was kind of a mix of what I had with the first cycle with the Bonham kit, but I threw in a small rack and two octos. I don't know, just trying to be creative. The LTE kit that I used actually was similar as well. So it was kind of modeled off of that. And I had just done the LTE sessions with a set like that. So I figured, you know what? I'm going to use that setup. I used that setup on the latest John Petrucci tour that I did. And then this is now the setup I'm using for the Winery Dogs album and 3 cycle.
Right.
But I try to mix it up from album to album, band to band, tour to tour. Try to mix it up, keep it interesting. The different setups kind of inspire me with something new each time.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, another thing that I noticed going through your drumming videos, it seems to me your movements have become what's the word I'm looking for? I actually wrote it down. It's the fluidity of your moments have become much more efficient. If you go back like 10 years to how you play now, and that there's the same force, but it's like you're not having to move your arms quite as much. And I was wondering if that's a conscious decision or something that just evolved.
It's evolved as a result of age. I'm 55 years old now and my body aches, and I'm not the spring chicken I was 30 years ago. So I don't know. I once again, I don't think about these things. If I think about them, I'll probably screw things up.
Right.
But it's probably just a natural evolution. Like, for instance, I now have to play with, I don't have to, but I choose to play with a drum throne that has a back support on it. It's just as we get older, our body gets older, and we take a beating a little easier than we used to. So I think it's just it's not a conscious thing. It's just age and evolution.
Yeah, yeah. What was the most fun track on this new album to put together for you?
Well, I like just jamming. And there's a few songs in this album that have the back end of the song is very open-ended. The song Pharaoh and the song Red Wine, both of those tracks, when you get to a certain point after the last chorus, they kind of open up into this little jam section. And in both cases, when I was tracking my drums for those two particular songs, I just went wherever, and kind of the three of us just followed each other. There was no discussion, hey, let's do this and we're going to go there. So in both of those cases, what you're hearing on the final album was just a spontaneous jam. The way we try to have that live as well, we wanted to try it with a few tracks in the studio. So I like those kind of moments where you're flying on the seat of your pants. You don't know where you're necessarily going to go. A lot of times, the drums could kind of direct the ups and the downs and the twists and turns, and we just listen to each other and follow each other, and that's a lot of fun, kind of working that way.
Yeah. I hope, I don't know what your plan is, but I do hope that red wine becomes part of the live set, just because it
It's such an anthem. It's a natural.
yeah, it's this quasi autobiographical tune, where it's just singing about yourselves, really, but it's just so fun.
Yeah,
I could see
it's a
that
natural.
as really having a great reaction live.
Yeah, I mean that's why it closes the album too. It happens to be one of the longer songs, but it's not long like a prog song. It's long just in terms of it being a jam and at the end, but it's also kind of an anthem. You could picture the whole room just raising their glasses, and
Yeah,
it's a party song.
right. um you do backing vocals on this. Did you record those while at the same time you recorded your drums, or did you overdub backing vocals?
No, much later, because at the point I'm recording my drums in the process of the Winery Dogs, like no lyrics are written. At that point, there's just scatty melodies. So yeah, the process is we write the arrangement of the music, track the drums, and then go away. And then Billy and Richie will track their proper guitar and bass. And then Richie will start to develop the lyrics and the melodies and record his vocals. And obviously his vocals have to come first. So once his vocals are done, months and months and months later, that's when Billy and I will then add our harmonies to whatever he had done.
Okay. And then, I mean, do you ever wonder, have you ever gotten into a situation where, all right, it's going to be a little bit difficult to sing this particular backing vocal over this drum piece that I crafted for this section of the song?
It happens occasionally, but honestly, it's not that hard for me. When I track my drums, excuse me, when I track my vocals, I'm usually sitting and tracking. I'm usually
Oh, okay.
right there on that couch
Right.
behind me, and in my home studio. And I track my vocals sitting down because that's the way I'm ultimately going to have to sing them live. And usually, by the time I sing them and lay them in, and then by the time we get into rehearsals and I get used to singing and playing at the same time, it's usually not that difficult. I've been doing it for a long time, so it's pretty comfortable for me.
Right, right. And then also going through some of your other interviews, you had this great line where you said, anybody that's serious about their instrument will never stop learning, never stop trying to grow and get better. So that makes me wonder, what have you learned? How have you grown, let's say, in recent years as a drummer?
To me, it's all about just having broad listening habits. I love music. I love all kinds of music, everything from pop to thrash metal. And, I'm constantly listening to new bands and new albums and new drummers and gaining inspiration from that. I spend so much time on the road or in the studio that I'm not like one of those traditional drummers where I'm sitting home practicing and working on technique. I just don't have the time or motivation to do that because I spend so much time behind the kit as it is. So for me, the inspiration comes from listening to other drummers. And there's so many great drummers you could see online now, whether it be on YouTube or Instagram. There's these young players with this incredible technique that's just always inspiring to watch. So you watch drummers like that, you listen to them, you pick up ideas and things. I mean, there's so many ways to now learn about your instrument that we didn't have when we were kids. When I was a kid, we didn't even have VHSs, much less Blu-rays and DVD players, or streaming, stuff on the internet. We didn't even have VHSs when I was a kid. We had TV and whatever was being shown on TV. So I didn't have the opportunity to watch Keith Moon or John Bonham unless, The Song Remains the Same was playing at the local movie theater. So that was the only way when I was a kid that I could watch and learn from my favorite drummers. Drummers today have everything at their fingertips. So, it's so easy to learn now and be inspired now. So even though I didn't learn about drums when I was younger that way, I could still be inspired at 55 years old and pick up things that way now and try to somehow utilize them into what I do.
Yeah. Although, it is interesting because I've talked to a bunch of other musicians who talk about growing up in the pre-digital age, and the lengths that they would go to try and learn the parts of their favorite players and
You had to
things like that.
listen. You couldn't
Yeah,
really watch. It was all about listening. I would listen with headphones to my favorite records and put on, Hendrix or Cream or Zeppelin or The Who or Kiss
yeah.
and just play along. And that's how I had to learn.
Yeah, no, I one of the bands I work with, Huey Lewis and the News, Huey was always talking about, yeah, how I learned harmonica. I said I put the needle down on the record, and then I would pick it up and then move it back, and then pick it up and move it back, and
Exactly.
right, um, and then just a couple of fun things to end with. Number one, watching the most recent video, Mad World. Did Richie ever drop that microphone? Because I always
No, he did very good. That was a new trick he had come up with for the video, and he nailed it every time.
wow. Okay, because I kept thinking, I was like, oh geez, no, this time it's going. But no, yeah, he had it. And then you had a recent post of you on a bus, a tour bus, watching the episode of that What's Happening with the Doobie Brothers
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
And this past year, I interviewed them, and Pat talks about, they released a fun autobiography about their time. But Pat always says, he's like, we've done this, we've done that, we've played here, we've played there. The one thing I get asked about everywhere is that one episode of What's Happening.
That's funny. I mean, first time I saw Kiss in '77 at the Garden, I snuck in a tape recorder just like Rerun did. And I recorded it. And that's what we'd have to do back then. I used to record the concerts, and I used to record movies because, like I said, you couldn't rewatch them. So I remember sneaking in a tape recorder to see A Clockwork Orange or the Rock and Roll High School, or any of my favorite movies, and I would take them, I would record them, take them home, and listen to them at home in my bedroom. And I recorded some early concerts just like Rerun did on What's Happening with the Doobie Brothers. But I didn't get
Right.
busted. I got out.
Also, the difference was, I don't think you were looking to make money off of
Oh,
this.
no,
It
no,
was
no. It
just,
was just for personal enjoyment because we didn't have those options back.
yeah. No, my thing a few years later was figuring out how to rig up the VHS player into a cassette deck so I could record the audio from some of those things
Right.
and be able to listen to it, elsewhere in the car and stuff like that. And then finally, and this has relation to nothing, except I think it's one of the better little bio lines I've seen. It goes to your wife's Instagram page, where she lists for her bio, wife, mother, this, that. No, I will not give you one of my husband's drum sets, which I thought,
That's funny.
let's cut this off at the past. I thought that was
Yeah,
awesome. So
that
I
is
thought that
funny.
was hilarious. But I don't know. We've covered all of my stuff. Is there anything we didn't talk about that you want to, or that you don't get asked about?
No, we're just excited to hit the road. We love playing live together, the three of us, and we can't wait to start touring again. So yeah, we're going to be very focused on the Winery Dogs all year. 2023 is the year of the dog.
Nice.